Alright, we had a series a super long time ago about the relative lore strength of the Skaven Lords. Since then, I've read a lot of Warhammer books, and I've made a lot of lore videos and whatever. But I think it's about time we finish that series and give everybody else their shot. So, we're going to do the Dwarfs. Now, we're going to do the Dwarfs and the Chaos Dwarfs in this list, ranking them by their relative power, and that would be power in a 1v1 competition, not so much as like a leader of armies or whatever. And that's why Malakai Makaisson ends up at the bottom of that list. Between the Chaos Dwarfs and the Dwarfs, he is the least powerful legendary lord. He's an inventor that took the Slayer Oath because of some mistakes he made in his inventions that got other dwarves hurt. He's not a coward, obviously. Like, he'll fight to the death and stuff, and he often fights along Gotrek Gurnisson and Felix Jaeger, but he's not that powerful of a combatant. His little gadgets, his grenades, and his pistols do more damage often than he can in, like, melee combat, so if you get past that, you can usually pretty easily take him down. He's an inventor first and a slayer second. And anybody else in this list is very powerful. Now, this isn't taking a dig at the guy. Like, you know, if you put him against 10 Storm Vermin, I would expect him to kill all 10 Storm Vermin. But we're talking about other legendary characters, and he is unfortunately the least resourceful of them. In our number 8 spot, we have Zhatan the Black, a feared general of the Chaos Dwarves, known for his cruelty against slaves and his opponents. I mean, he's a pretty terrible dude, and he's a solid fighter, as I accidentally phase inside of him. He is ahead of Malakai, because I believe a fight between the two of them would go pretty easily. That Malakai would be shooting at him, he would raise that giant shield of his, charge him, and then chop Malakai to death. He's a good warrior, but compared to anybody else in this list, I think there is a pretty big gap between 8 and 9, which he is 8th, between them and 7th, and it only goes up from there. You might think about his Lamasu mount, but in these lists, I only consider named mounts that, like, the character is known for, like Deathclaw or Karl Franz. And Zhatan being able to ride a Lamasu in Warhammer is Warhammer 3 is not exactly lore powerful, I guess, because then, like, Malakai could be riding his Thunder Barge, so yeah. In the number 7 spot, we have Thorek Ironbrow. With that dreaded Anvil of Doom, one of the last rune lords who can command such things to life. Thorek Ironbrow is the oldest rune lord currently active. Well, I guess not currently, because the end times happened and the universe ended, but before the universe ended, he was the most powerful rune lord left. In the end times, he was killed off screen, so couldn't have been that hard to get rid of him. Skaven took him down, along with Khazandor Dragon Tamer, but Thorek was still very powerful, and rune magic is a little more deadly in 1v1 combat than it is shown in Total War Warhammer 2 and 3, but still, you know, he is a fearsome combatant. He would beat Zhatan and Malakai easily, but I do think he would lose to number 6 on this list. I think it'd be pretty close between him and the next one. But yeah, he's a good support lord for armies, but his runes can also do a lot of damage. They can send, like, lightning bolts shattering out to electrocute people to death, send out great gouts of flame and all those sorts of things as he bangs on the Anvil of Doom. So, yeah, Thorek's good, and he's a really solid melee combatant as well, if you get close to him. That hammer does more than just hit the anvil. So coming in at 6th, it was actually difficult to pick between him and Thorek for the number 6 spot, but I did slightly side with Astragoth, because I feel like if it actually came to combat, he would beat Thorek. Astragoth is the oldest sorcerer prophet of Hashut, the minor chaos god of fire and pride and tyranny. So, he is a powerful mage, but as dwarves use magic, if they ever screw up even slightly, their limbs start to petrify and turn into stone. And he's been alive long enough to screw up enough times that now all of his limbs are stone, and he needs these machines to move them. But, you know, he did invent the machines, so when he gets into a fight, he is punching you in the face with a giant metal gauntlet powered by fire and rockets. That'll do a lot of damage. Plus, being a sorcerer prophet gives him plenty of magic to withstand Thorek's attacks. Because the comparison that made me decide on him in the 6th spot is whether or not he could beat Thorek. So I imagine he would just charge at him on his metal legs, Thorek could cast a few runes on the way, Astragoth would pretty easily deflect them. Plus, he's still a dwarf, so he has some decent magic resistance just innately from how dwarves are built. So Thorek wouldn't get too much out of his runes, nothing Astragoth couldn't counter, and then when they get into melee combat, I do think Astragoth would win. He's just faster and stronger than Thorek is, with all of his apparatus and stuff, but it'd be a close fight. It was pretty difficult to decide on, and yeah, just because he's the oldest sorcerer prophet of Hashut, it doesn't mean he's the strongest. There is one stronger, and you know, if you do your Chaos Dwarf quick maths, you'll figure out that one's ahead of him. So Astragoth's a little spoopy, a little scary. In the number 5 spot is dividing the Dwarf Lords that I had a hard time placing due to their weaknesses, and now we're getting into the Dwarf Lords that I can place due to their strengths. Belegar Ironhammer is one of the best Dwarf Warriors that is alive. He is kind of foolish in the books, his pride leads him to a lot of problems, but in a fight, he is never doubted to be one of the best. The Shield of Angrund is amazing. It can deflect any amount of magical attacks. It really doesn't take any damage. It can even withstand Queek Headtaker's Maul Dwarf Gouger that is magically empowered to split Dwarven armor like it's nothing. The Shield of Defiance still stands up to that. So, Belegar's defense is impeccable. He is also very, very fast with his hammer. He's just well known as a great duelist. The main thing that's holding him back on this list is his inability to scale. His hammer does make it very hard for him to fight large monsters. Like, it just doesn't do that much damage compared to, like, an axe or, not a sword as much. But there are things that he'll do very well against anybody infantry sized, maybe even ogre sized, but larger than an ogre, and he's going to have issues really dealing meaningful damage with his hammer. And blocking with the shield will matter less and less if you just get stepped on, right? So he has an issue with scaling, but as far as skill goes, he is unmatched in the Dwarven realms besides Ungrim Ironfist. In our number 4 spot, the final of the Chaos Dwarf Lords, Drazhoath the Ashen did manage to get up in the top 4 slot. He loses to any of the 3 lords above him, but he is rather spooky in his own right. The most powerful current sorcerer prophet of Hashut. He was banished from the capital Zar Nagorond just due to his obvious ambitions for greater power, and political scheming took him out of the fray, pushed him down to the Black Tower of Zar in the south. But from there he has built up his skills as a sorcerer, and he got Cinder Breath, his Bale Taurus mount. And in this list, just having a mount does give you a lot of advantages. Like, the reason I put him above Belegar is that he has access to magic, but like, if he just had access to magic and he had to fight Belegar on foot, Belegar would win. But the fact that he has a flying mount, I mean, you could cheese this type of list in a boring way and say he could just stay flying and cast spells and flame breaths on Belegar until Belegar died. But like, even if he lands, I mean, the Bale Taurus is going to be really hard for Belegar to deal with, and maybe, possibly Belegar... Why am I stumbling so much of that? Anyway, maybe Belegar kills Cinder Breath, maybe, but then he'll definitely be weakened and wounded in some form that Drazhoath on the ground could just finish him off. So, nah. Belegar ain't beating Drazhoath. Anyone above him on this list is, though. So, respectable 4th place for the Chaos Dwarves, but the original Dowie, I think the top 3 spots belong to them entirely. Number 3 on this list, I'm sure will be controversial that he's not number 1, but we do have Grombrindal, the White Dwarf. In life, he was a High King, and he defeated an Exalted Great Unclean One, alongside Malekith, who was fighting... I believe Malekith was fighting Exalted Lord of Change, way in the days of yore. But yeah, Grombrindal is a spooky, scary guy, though we are currently talking about him in Death, where he is like a pretty much an ancestor god in his own right, where he just wanders around to fights where he's needed, shows up whenever the dwarves are in trouble, and aids them in their time of need. Grombrindal is a fierce combatant in his current state, though I haven't really seen too many crazy feats that put him above the other 2 on this list. If he was still the High King and he had the Throne of Power, then yeah, he would be number 1. But just Grombrindal on his own, I think he falls into spot number 3. I do think he could beat Drazhoath and Cinder Breath. His Rune Axe is very, very powerful, and if Cinder Breath ever went near him, probably one shot would take off one of his legs or a wing, grounding Cinder Breath, and before Cinder Breath could recover, he'd take 3 or 4 more chops that would just put him out of his misery. I don't think Drazhoath would stand much of a chance against Grombrindal. Number 2 on our list for the most powerful legendary lords of the dwarf races is Ungrim Ironfist. The Slayer King of Caer-Codrin, he holds the passes to the north, fights many a Chaos Legion and a Chaos Champion in his constant quest to seek death while also being a good king. He has the axe Red Ruin, and he is the most fearsome of all dwarven combatants. In the end times, he even becomes the incarnate of fire and fights against Archaon's horde, doing a lot of damage to them, before eventually falling. I believe he just stayed behind as like a heroic sacrifice to buy them time to escape, so he just fought until the very end. There is a story somewhere about him fighting a dragon ogre Shaggoth that's like, I don't think it's Kolak, I think it's Kolak's dad, but there's one that took up so much space it was like literally laying over mountains, and he went and fought it. I don't really know how you could even fight something like that at this stature. Like, I just don't know how your axe could even chunk meaningful amounts off of it, but allegedly he beat something like that. I don't know if that's true or not, but Ungrim is fearsome. I think he could beat almost any combatant that is on a mount of any kind. I think he could beat most of them on foot as well. He's just a really spooky, scary guy. But he does come in number 2 at this list. So, think about that. Honorable mention at spot number 2 here is Gotrek Gurnisson. He has one of the axes of Grimnir. So, that's kind of powerful. He is not... Why I say honorable mention at spot 2 is because he's not a legendary lord, so he doesn't really count for this list, but he is stronger than Ungrim Ironfist, barely. It's pretty close between the two. And Gotrek does save Ungrim's life a couple times in the books. So I guess I'll give him that nudge up for saving Ungrim. Probably means he's better than him, kind of, sort of. But it is close between the two. I don't think either of them can touch number 1 here. But at the end of his books, in some kind of end timesy shenanigans, he does take Grimnir's spot in the realms of chaos, just trying to hold back the infinite tides. So he's a spooky, scary guy, with the biggest and most baddest axe there ever was. In the final spot, there is Thorgrim Grudgebearer. And some people might be shocked at this because Ungrim and Belegar are both just factually better combatants than Thorgrim is. But Thorgrim is the current High King, which gives him the Throne of Power. And the Throne of Power is a ridiculous artifact that gives him such, like, unparalleled power in the Dwarven realms that I don't think Ungrim could even come close to touching him, and Ungrim was number 2 on this list. There is the Rune of Azamar, I think it's called, on the back of the throne, that in the end times he pops to fight Queek Headtaker and also just push back the infinite tides of Skaven, but the rune breaks due to lore reasons. But when it's active, he's like literally a god, just walking around embodying fools. Even without his axe, he can just like punch and send several people flying. I don't know. And the throne provides a lot of ward save type things, spell resistance, and Grombrindal, as I mentioned before, on the Throne of Power, killed an Exalted Great Unclean One that vomited on him directly. He just absorbed it with the Throne of Power. So the High King is nearly unkillable as long as he's on the Throne of Power, and his throne bearers are holding him up. I think any High King, if there is a High King that has fallen while on the Throne of Power, it's probably because his throne bearers died, and then he fell off the Throne of Power. But I don't think that would be too much of a problem here, as even if these guys fell, Ungrim, just being a dwarf and being short, would have issues getting on the Throne of Power and fighting Thorgrim. So, no. Thorgrim could take him just because he's the current High King, and the throne is just so insane. Off of it, not a chance. Off of it, he's probably 9th. Not 9th. I don't know. He's below Astragoth and Thorek, because Thorek has the Anvil of Doom and Astragoth is spooky and mechanical. So I guess he'd be above Zhatan without the throne. But with the Throne of Power, he's legit number 1. He's so spooky. Roar. Subscribe, yes.